Hat, sunglasses, Pepsi, notes, sources, thick skin. Check. You already know. Let's go. Golden Blooded is a college football YouTube channel for entertainment. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and let's get into our next college football video. Don't forget to send gear to represent your team. The address is P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina 29657. Yeah. Oregon and Washington will head to the Big 10. No, the Big 10 will never accept Oregon and Washington. There are two sides of this argument. We do know that Oregon and Washington this is a fact. They have applied to the Big 10, and the Big 10 said, no, not right now. We're accepting USC and UCLA. Maybe in the future, we'll keep your application, but as of right now, that's a no. And a lot of people, including myself, thought that that was a Kevin Warren decision because, well, he was the Big 10 commissioner at the time. Now he's the new Chicago Bears president and CEO of operations. But honestly, it wasn't Kevin Warren. It was the Ohio State. The Ohio State said, no, we don't need any more members. USC and UCLA is good enough for now. Let's stick with them. So what's the real argument? Why did Ohio State not want Oregon and Washington into the Big 10, even if it's just for now? A lot of people are saying, period, never. I don't know about that because I think if the SEC makes another move, the Big 10 will make another move. And if Ohio State still objects, the Big 10 is going to be like, you're just going to have to get over it because they're gaining more numbers. We need more numbers to keep up with the Joneses, okay? So come on, Ohio State. We got to get these two teams to keep up with the numbers of the SEC. But it is a fact that Ohio State did not want Oregon and Washington. Now I'm hearing a lot from Pac-12 fans, whatever you want to call them, officials, hearsay people in my message boards and people in my comment section saying, now Oregon and Washington do not want to go to the Big 10 because of the playoff expansion. It guarantees that the Pac-12 will make the playoffs, and I would say not so fast because of the money. And I understand that the Pac-12 has a lot of money in research and academics, but so does the Big 10. And they can one-up the Pac-12 because of the TV deal. So to say that Oregon and Washington no longer want to go to the Big 10 just because the playoffs expanded, and that means that the Pac-12 still has a chance to get to the playoffs, honestly, I think that's nonsense. I think that's a little naive if you really believe that, or maybe you're just a solid Pac-12 fan and you don't want to believe that. That I can understand. You don't want the Pac-12 to fall apart because if Oregon and Washington do head off to the Big 10, yeah, the falling apart is a coming unless the Pac-12 can get over themselves, like I talked about yesterday in a video, and invite some teams out of the Mountain West. And my teams were Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State, and Air Force. Those were my 4 teams. That would get your numbers back up from 8 to 12. But once again, the Pac-12 would have to get over themselves and their elitist status, and I'm not using that as a negative term. It's actually a good thing. They hold academics and research in high regards, but as far as accepting new members, when you're down to 8 members and you really don't have any other universities to choose from that are in the same label as you, you're going to have to lower your standards as far as accepting new members. That's just my 2 cents. So yes, I do think that the Pac-12 could have a major chance of falling apart if Oregon and Washington do end up going to the Big 10. And I still think it's going to happen. I do think that Oregon and Washington will end up in the Big 10. Not now, of course. The Big 10 has said no. But what you need to look for is whenever the SEC expands again. And the next thing to look at is the ACC grant of rights. I'm hearing that the 8 teams needed to vote down the ACC grant of rights and disband the ACC basically because the floodgates would be opened up after that. They do exist, but they haven't voted yet. Listen, the teams that are in the ACC love being in the ACC. They just don't like the money. Maybe there's negotiations between the ACC and ESPN. And I heard that there were brief negotiations between ESPN and the ACC network as far as raising their TV deal. Maybe those negotiations are ongoing and those 8 teams are holding back with their vote, waiting for that new number saying, well, if this new number is good enough, we actually do want to stay in the ACC. So until they actually vote to dissolve the ACC still exists. So the next thing to look for is those 8 teams to vote to dissolve the grant of rights, and poof goes the ACC. And then when that happens, then the Big 10 and the SEC will be looking towards the ACC. And then Oregon and Washington might be in trouble as far as an invite to the Big 10. So that's the one thing that could throw a monkey wrench into the plans of Oregon and Washington. Because once the ACC, those 8 teams vote to dissolve and everybody starts to scatter, I do think the Big 10 wants some teams out of the ACC. And those teams include, I don't know which ones they actually get, but they include this list. I think they want Virginia. I think they want North Carolina. I think they want Duke. I think they want Georgia Tech. They might want Pitt, but I'm not sure about that. And they might want Syracuse, but I'm not sure about that. But those other 4 teams, they definitely want those 4 teams. Virginia Tech is trying to get AAU status, and so is the Miami Hurricanes, but I don't think the Big 10 would still want the Miami Hurricanes. Virginia Tech maybe to go along with Virginia, so just something to keep your eyes and ears out on for that. Maybe Virginia Tech is trying to get into the Big 10 and they want that AAU status, and maybe that tells us that Virginia Tech is one of those 8 teams willing to vote to dissolve the grant of rights, but they're not voting now because they don't have AAU status. Maybe that's it. Maybe Virginia Tech is waiting until they get the AAU status because they know they would get into the Big 10 once they get the AAU status. So they're like, we're not voting now, but once we get our AAU status, then we will vote to dissolve. Maybe it's Virginia Tech that's holding up this whole situation with the ACC. I'm not saying that's actually happening as far as Virginia Tech being the team saying no, not yet, and there's 7 other teams, but Virginia Tech makes the 8. But it could be. You never know. So once that happens, the Big 10 will want to get 4 teams out of the ACC. I named 6 of them. There's going to be at least 4 of those 6, and you add Virginia Tech in there, that's actually 7. So they could end up getting Virginia Tech, Virginia, North Carolina, and Duke. That's a pretty good get if you ask me for the Big 10. And then of course, we know the SEC definitely wants Florida State and Clemson. They also want North Carolina. They also would like NC State, but would prefer North Carolina over NC State. Maybe they would look at a Miami Hurricanes, although I don't think Florida would want Florida State and the Miami Hurricanes coming in at the same time. So the Miami Hurricanes might be destined for the Big 12. Anyways, I digress. Getting back to the Oregon and Washington situation. Most people say the reason why Ohio State did not want Oregon and Washington in the Big 10 was because of numbers, saying that they didn't add enough value to where the pie could actually grow, and instead of just adding teams for the sake of numbers and having to split the pie more, they want brands that will add actual value. Well, it's hard for me to believe that a Virginia or a Georgia Tech or even a Duke or a Syracuse or a Pitt could add any type of significant value more than Oregon and Washington. In fact, I think Oregon and Washington would add more value than any of those teams. The only team that I say could add more value than those 2 teams would be North Carolina. But that's it. The rest of the teams on the list, no, I don't think they would add more value. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I don't know. I'm just eyeballing it here. So I don't think that's the real reason. I think the real reason, and this is going to sound crazy, way out there, and it's definitely hearsay. Remember, these videos are for entertainment purposes only, but maybe Ohio State, the Ohio State, you cannot forget about the word the, and I've probably forgot about it a couple of times, so I'm going to hear about it in the comments section, but it might be the Ohio State doesn't want another university with an O to start the name of the university. Haven't thought of that. I know it's childish, it's petty, but you never know. Remember, Ohio State the Ohio State tried to trademark. I don't know if it was successful or unsuccessful. Come to think about it, I am saying the Ohio State, so maybe it was successful, but I don't know. They did at least try to trademark the word the. So yes, they are a little petty when it comes to their name. So maybe they could be that petty and that childish to where they do not want another university starting with the letter O coming into the Big 10. Let's think about these ACC teams. North Carolina, no, that's an N. Georgia Tech, no, that's a G. Virginia Tech, no, both of those are V's. Syracuse, no, that's an S. Pitt, no, that's a P. So all those clear that O hurdle, and Oregon does not. Listen, I'm not saying that's the reason, but their reason of they don't add enough value doesn't make any sense if the Big 10 is actually interested in those ACC teams. which they are. So that excuse just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm just trying to come up with excuses. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm just throwing that out there and seeing if it sticks. Maybe it's the reason, maybe it's not the reason. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of backlash from Ohio State fans about this. And I understand that. I'm okay with that. Let me have it. I have thick skin. It's just a thought that popped in my head. That's all I can say. So y'all have it in the comment section. Number one, do you think that Washington and Oregon do eventually end up in the Big 10? Do you think that those four teams in the ACC SEC, counting them one at a time, not all four of them versus two of them, but one versus one, does any one of those universities besides North Carolina add more value than Washington and Oregon? I don't think so, but maybe I'm wrong. And finally, the last thing, do you think that maybe one of the reasons that Oregon and Washington didn't make it to the Big 10 was because Ohio State did not want another university starting with the letter O in the Big 10? The comment section should be good for this one. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.